Oh, the times are changing, but it remains to be seen whether it's for the better or the worst. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risks all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. Today we are talking about the new sprint race format that's going to be going ahead in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and beyond. All teams have unanimously agreed to a new format that will be unveiled at round 4 at Baku. In short, Saturday's practice session is being dropped and instead there'll be Saturday's sprint races, which will be standalone isolated events, while qualifying, still on Friday, will set the grid for the Sunday race. So to start with, Angus, you have strong opinions on the sprint race formats in its old guise and its new guise and all guises. What's your reaction to this?
Oh, that's my
and satisfying
positive,
some people.
yeah.
And that's woo. Oh, I mean, one thing I've tried to work on over the last few years is to sort of see both sides more often, and that's what I'm going to try to do. And I'm going to start by saying, let's give it a chance. Okay? Now, one thing which I think is a positive, and I can look at positively, is something which actually sort of was born out the first set of sprint races a couple of years ago, is that for the Grand Prix on the Sunday, you have a qualifying session on a Friday afternoon / Friday night. Now, if you look past the cynical view of TV viewing figures and all that, I think that's not a bad time to hold qualifying. Friday evening, lots of people coming in from work around the sort of the European time slots. It's a nice thing on a Friday evening to watch an hour of Formula 1 qualifying. I think it also builds it up throughout the Friday. Its purpose is to give that Friday something to sort of revolve around, instead of just 2 practice sessions where people are trying out bits on the cars, etc., and there's less going on. So that's good. However, there are some things. 1 lap qualifying. Something which we thought that... This is for the sprint, by the way. 1 lap qualifying, which we thought had been consigned to the dustbin. It was used many years ago in the sort of mid-2000s, before the knockout qualifying that we have was introduced. And they looked at 1 lap qualifying, and for several factors, for example, the fact that you could have a qualifying session where in the first half an hour it's beautiful sunshine, the second half an hour it's pouring with rain, and you give it an immediate unfair disadvantage to those in the second half an hour. The fact that you only ever have 1 car on track at once, and you're focused on going and watching them around the track at all times. The fact that it doesn't even have a countdown clock, which is one of the main bits of jeopardy and one of the main attractions of the knockout qualifying system. So this all happened, and F1 went, it doesn't work, we won't revisit that again. So why are they revisiting it again? Would be my argument. So, also, I think for someone who is, as we've discovered in the last few episodes, not a big fan of change, having all this change with only 4 weeks' notice, that's it seems not on a whim, because I think this talk has probably been brewing underneath the surface amongst F1 chiefs for at least a few months, if not about a year or so. But bringing it in Baku in 4 weeks' time, I'm not sure about that. Also, a point which Christian Horner has raised, having a sprint circuit on Baku, on a street circuit, Yes, good racing generally. It has produced some solid races over the years, Baku. But think of the risk. There's a big risk on that. A high-speed street circuit with 20 cars going hammer and tongs in a sprint race, which, by the way, because of its the nature, will be, and also the fact it'll be the first one of its kind, this new format, it's going to be pretty hectic. I'd say these decisions from F1 look quite spontaneous, but not necessarily in a good way. Now, I turn to you two to say whether I'm just being a grump or whether we have some concurrent opinions here.
I think to some extent it's going to be very difficult to satisfy the community with this one. Sprints will forever, I think, be something you either like or you don't. And it seems to me like, Angus, you fall very much on the I don't like it side, and I think I don't mind it. I don't mind the sprints. I think they are better, I think, now that they are standalone races. And one of the things that this addresses is the original issue with sprints, which is why would a team bother taking a big risk if they've qualified well and they can make it up in the race? Why would you bother? Because you don't want to crash out and ruin your chances. And we've seen that quite a few times. I think there have been cases of drivers going a bit too far in the sprint, crashing out, thinking, well, I've got to make up all in the race tomorrow. And so the idea with this is that you make it its own standalone thing, and that's cool. I like that. I'm less sure about the one hit qualifier. I don't know what you think, but it reminds me of the Formula 1 games. You do one lap qualifying before giving it a go in the Grand Prix. And that's cool. That's fine. For a video game, it's pretty fun. But as you're saying, in real world, you don't have fixed circumstances. The weather changes, wind changes, and I'm not totally sure how they will solidify the rules if, for example, let's say there's a red flag, and then you red flag the race for a bit, and then you say it rains, and you go, well, what do we do to rectify that? Because clearly then you're going to have a bizarre qualifying. But then, in real qualifying, there have been occasions where the first 10 minutes have been dry and the last 5 minutes have been wet, and you deal with it. It doesn't make as much of a difference because it's the qualifying, let's say Q1, is your traditional 18 minutes long, and you think, well, yeah, fine, the first 9 minutes may be dry and the second wet, but everyone get out, do a lap. But those factors do come into play, and it being a standalone event, I guess, then at least it doesn't affect the Grand Prix for Sunday. So I can kind of see why they're doing it. I think this maybe is the most extreme example of change I think we've seen in Formula 1 for a while when in terms of the fixed format that we've come to get so used to. I can't think of such a big change happening for a very long time. There's been qualifying changes every so often. I think 2016 was it? They tried to do new qualifying, or 2015 that they did for 2 races. I'm sure you two will remember the year. They gave it a go in Australia, and no one bothered going out to track. But this is like even further than that. This is a new event with a new qualifying format as well for a new race on Sunday. So yeah, I think they're always going to struggle to sell this one to the community, because I think to some extent people just aren't ready for this amount of change. And I have other questions, such as, if you're going to make drivers race more, if you're going to make cars race more, are you going to increase the number of engines, for example, you're giving teams for a year's allocation? Because, well, 6 races is 6 races. It might well be shorter races, but damage still happens and they are still being stressed.
Yeah, indeed. To start with, I think my opinions about this change is I don't hate it, but then again I don't love it. I think realistically speaking, none of us, anyone in Formula 1, thought to themselves that sprint races were going to disappear one day. Once they were in the calendar, I'd say probably the biggest change to the weekend calendar, to the overall calendar since this change really came in. Once they were in, they weren't going to go away unless they were a spectacular failure. And they're always going to be good and welcomed by some in the Formula 1 community. I get the idea a bit about it being a sort of gateway, if you will, for those who are getting into the sport to get a taste about what a weekend's really about, what Sunday's Grand Prix is really about, and to sort of put your toe in, so to speak. But this change is good in one way because I like the idea of qualifying setting the grid for Sunday. I like the idea of there being jeopardy and certainty. A team that's lower down in the rankings, Haas for example, getting higher up and then being able to keep that being watered down, and the best cars and the best teams and best drivers essentially getting themselves to the top of the grid as is, and then that sort of uncertainty and that entertainment factor is gone really owing to the sprint race. I'm not too hot on the changes to the points, or the lack of really. So for those who don't know, the top 8 finishers will score points. P1 gets 8 all the way down to P8 that gets 1 point. It's not a huge amount of points for teams, drivers, constructors, engineers to go and put, belt and braces and hammers and tongs really into a Grand Prix like Baku, into a sprint circuit of that ilk, when you know that there's going to be so much more cost versus reward that can come from that. As well, I like the idea, if I'm going to flip it on its head, about there being more entertainment, because yes, it is a sport that we love to watch, but we love to watch it because it's entertaining, and I dare say that very few people watch Free Practice 2 and go, cool, yeah, isn't this fun? Aren't I enjoying nothing happening for a long period of time? That's good for the fan, right? But then again, for those doing the work, the drivers, those part of the team, they need that data. So my question there is there going to be a replacement? Is there going to be a training session of sorts for the teams? Is there a chance for them to get more data? Or is it just every day is a show night, if you will? Because that is more entertaining, there's more jeopardy, there's more uncertainty, but not necessarily good for the sport, not necessarily so good for engineering and the best team creating the best formula and getting the best results really, because they deserve it and it's a meritocratic sport. So I mean, we knew the sprint races were going to grow in numbers as well, but I think as well, with the growth of that number, with it being a standalone event, the cost cap does need to change, really, because there does need to be some latitude on that, because as we've all hinted at there's no way we can have more Formula 1, more racing, more entertainment, more quality with the same budget, because budgets are already tight, as we saw last year when it came to various constructors. So realistically speaking, there's got to be some latitude, which brings me on to my final point for now, is that I think this has been rushed through. I think this should have been done at the start of the season or waited until the end of this season going into next, without it being rushed in round 4 really. We're hardly into this season and it's being pushed through, which worries me a bit really. But teams unanimously agree to it, so who am I to judge?
Well, they did, but I think there is a bit of confusion in what has been agreed. And I don't know, because I've been trying to find out in preparation for this podcast what's been agreed and what hasn't, and it seems to me like there is definitely a disagreement between teams because and the FIA, because in the previous Grand Prix in Australia, they said no, there isn't going to be one shot qualifying. Toto Wolff said no, there isn't going to be one shot qualifying. That's just something we haven't agreed to. Then we hear from Stefano Domenicali that there is going to be this one hit qualifying. To some extent, I think he's just stirring up trouble because it's a bit quiet in the new cycle for Formula 1 at the moment, given that they've decided to put in a stupid break between the third race and the fourth race. This is just too long. I don't like having a beginning of season break. It's just not fair. Give us more racing, please. So it's a bit of a short news cycle this week, and I think he's gone, I know what I'll do. I'll bring up one-shot qualifying because that will really get the old school fans frothing at the mouth. They'll love that. Really something to get their teeth into. And now, of course, that's happened, and Christian Horner doesn't like it, and other team principals don't like it either. And what do you think about Azerbaijan as a place to go to for the first sprint qualifying? Do you think it's going to be an appropriate venue?
Oh no. I think it's one of those where all the other ones for sprint races, you look at somewhere like Austria, Belgium, Austin, Texas, Brazil, great ideas, but to have Baku as the starting Grand Prix circuit to have this on is probably the worst idea of a curtain raiser, because there's going to be so much damage and that's going to go and hamper teams in the race, in my view.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's a really, really chaotic track at the best of times, and at the worst of times, the concern is, without, as you say, Tom, the budget cap going up, or really thinking about it, properly, that we're going to have a situation where no teams want to really participate in that. Because look, I imagine if you're a team, you're going to sit down and go, right, we've got to make sure there's quite a big pool of money sitting around for Azerbaijan, just in case something goes wrong. For example, if you want to hear very quickly how much a driver can cost a team, I'm not sure if you saw the interview with Gunther Steiner about how Mick Schumacher's crash cost them £2 million or $2 million.
Just one crash as well. Crazy, isn't it?
That was his $2 million. So in total, that was $2 million crashes. That's how much he cost the team. He wrote off cars. He said it's just effing ridiculous how many people we could employ with $700,000, and now I have to find that money. And that's because fundamentally Mick Schumacher kept crashing the car, and in the end cost the team $2 million. And so you have to think, right, well, if we're going to go to Azerbaijan, if you're going to cause drivers to put themselves into jeopardy again, what's the compensation going to be? Is 8 points enough a risk worth taking, given that usually it's not the person in first place that crashes, it's usually third or fourth. So if you're in the fight there and you're let's say it's someone like Ocon, who we know doesn't like to back out from things, versus someone like Alonso, right? Two drivers that go wheel to wheel and can be very aggressive. At what point do you go, hold on a minute, this is only for 3 points? Is it worth it? And what do the teams do? Well, maybe the drivers do because they want every set, possible point. But to me, I'll be thinking this isn't really worth it.
No, especially for the lower teams. And I think we may get to a situation where teams are almost instructing their drivers, try a bit, try a lot, but don't try too much. Don't try writing your car off, in my view. I mean, that's coming from nowhere at all. That's just pure speculation. But if I was in charge of a Haas, a Williams, AlphaTauri on a lower budget, you would almost be sort of gently nudging a driver saying, hang on, those walls are pretty close. And it's for minimal points. Let's save ourselves to the race so we can go and get some proper points and then get some more development from there and go from there, really. But in terms of Baku being on the list, I thought there were two obvious admissions, really, from it. First of all, Bahrain. I thought it would have been a perfect place for a sprint race. And, dare I say, the Temple of Speed, Monza? Is that sort of good for sprinting? What do you think?
I mean, Baku is one. But it's an interesting point you make about the team principals saying to their drivers that they need to stay away from the wall stay away from the walls as much as possible because of the cost cap. The flip side is that we've had some absolutely chaotic races in Baku over the last few years. The ones that come to mind, 2017 where Ricciardo won and Stroll finished on the podium. 2018 where the Red Bulls crashed into each other and Bottas's tyre blew up when he was in the lead with 2 laps to go. 2021 when Verstappen's tyre blew up when he was in the lead, Hamilton locked up at the restart, and then Vettel and Gasly finished on the podium. So it's also the kind of race where chaos can happen, and it's a chance for teams to actually think of someone like Haas or AlphaTauri or like Alfa Romeo. This could be a brilliant chance for them to score some good points. I mean, other ones, I mentioned those rogue results there, but other ones that come to mind, I remember in 2017, I think Kevin Magnussen was on the podium at one point in a Haas, or in 2018 you had Perez in a Racing Point, or a Force India as it used to be called, on the podium. And then you had that race as well where Fernando Alonso in that dog-slow McLaren got 2 punctures on the opening lap and then dragged it back up to 7th place. So it's a chance, arguably, for for teams to get some points amongst all the chaos. And it'll be interesting to see what approach they go for and whether Baku proves to be a good venue for the sprint race. In terms of alternative venues, I agree Monza is one which I think has been used both the last 2 years, if I'm correct in thinking. Definitely in 2021, because it helped Daniel Ricciardo to get at the grid and take that long-awaited victory at McLaren. I'd agree with Bahrain. I think as a racing venue, that's a good venue for a sprint race. I'd actually like to see a sprint race at Canada. I think that Canada would be a good venue because of its propensity to be both a street circuit, but also not the tightest street circuit in the world. It traditionally produces good racing with some action. So I think there would also be a good venue. And perhaps if I was to throw one more, maybe a sort of a why not a sprint race in Las Vegas. I mean, that would really whet the appetite of those with any whet the appetite of those with any sort of reinforced bank accounts who work in Formula One, because that would be really one for the eyeballs and one for the money.
I'm not convinced on Las Vegas just yet because we haven't actually seen any racing there. All we've seen is a lot of spectacle so far. And yeah, so I'm not so sure. No, I think Tom and Angus, you raise excellent points with where to go instead. But I think Monza would be all right. I wonder really with Monza as a track now, because although it's produced some good racing and it's very much a great track, when you break it down whether or not it'd be good for a sprint, I'm not as convinced. It relies on getting a really good pass into good pass into turn one. Really, that start finish straight and is really where all the overtaking happens. I feel like we've descended to a point in Monza where we just wait for the lead car to make a mistake, and then it's usually turn one. They go a bit deep. And the car following, who has DRS, is able to get a good drive alongside and get DRS into the next section and then overtake. Right, that tends to be how we see overtakes now at Monza. And even with that, actually getting past with all the DRS zones that they put into Monza could be really difficult. I refer you to Charles Leclerc versus Lewis Hamilton, when Charles Leclerc held Hamilton back for the whole race. And granted, he almost got a penalty for some pretty dodgy defending, but the fact is Hamilton couldn't get past him, and unfortunately, so that is what Monza is now. It is a race where you have to just wait for an overtake, I think, and so I don't think it lends particularly well to sprint races. But I hope I'm proved wrong. So perhaps this is the FIA strategy. They have a sprint race in a place where disasters do and can happen to make them a little bit more interesting, because I still think sprint races haven't got their format down, and I think they're too long. I think if we're going to have a sprint, you really have a sprint. I think we should have dedicated sprint tyres. So Angus, last episode you spoke about the good old days when you used to have the super sticky qualifying tyres, which would be good for a few laps. Well, I think we should have basically sprint tyres, which are like chewing gum-esque style. So that sort of super duper sticky that are only good for a few laps. I think basically a sprint race should be a race of maybe 15 laps, i.e. you get in front as soon as you can, and then you have to just run away for 15 laps and hold on. Because I don't think, contrary to what you said, Angus, I don't think it is a place where the teams lower down can do better. I think we'd like to say that, but I don't think it's true. And if you go back into previous sprint race results, that kind of stands up. For example, the Brazilian one, well, it was George Russell in first, Carlos Sainz in Ferrari second, Lewis Hamilton in Mercedes third, followed by the Red Bulls, followed by another Ferrari, and Haas all the way down in eighth. Bear in mind, they started on pole position. So, yeah, Magnussen managed to hold on for one more point. But if it was a much shorter race, he would be able to hold on for well, perhaps he would have got 7th or even 6th place. So I think as they stand, it's a place where the top drivers just rise to the top as we would expect, because it's too long.
And what do you make about the recent comments from Stefano De Michele about the plans? His saying it would be possible to cancel all practice sessions. I mean, I've hold my hands up and say I don't often watch the practice sessions. I just look at them afterwards and go, cool, and then get on with qualifying or the race. But our thoughts on that, is that a bit too far, do you reckon?
Well, his comments on practice was really interesting, because when you look at the other divisions, they have a much less practice. So Formula 2 has really only one free practice. Formula 3, again, just the one. And you're not expected to have the track, I think, as well memorized from driving around in practices in those divisions. You're expected to do simulator work, book work, memorizing the track, and you get much less time in the real world. And in Formula 1, of course, you go straight up to free practices 1, 2 and 3, and drivers like George Russell have been vocal in the fact that they don't necessarily think that you need as much free practice. I would argue that it is necessary for the teams to get all the data out of the track and out of their car. So what I think really need to ask ourselves is, do you want the teams to know and be able to get all of the data? What do you think, Angus? Is that what basically we're going back towards the Bernie Ecclestone era of no more radios between the teams and the driver, no more having as much data?
I think that it can have its positives, I suppose, because we sort of, it's something which, an argument against this part of F1 is that the teams have so much time to prepare that they kind of saturate all the data, and they sort of are able to just put all that time in and therefore get exactly what they want, which means that any unknown variables which we want to sort of trip them up kind of are taken out of the equation, because they know you can never know all the unknowns, but it gets to a stage where they know all the unknowns, arguably. And this would lead to a situation where, they have less time. They have sort of more needs to get on with things and to hurry up and to find solutions. It's something which is, admittedly, in a same spec series, happens in Formula 2 and Formula 3. They have one practice session on a Friday, have qualifying for the main race on a Friday evening. Saturday is a sprint race, and then Sunday is called the feature race, or I guess their version of the Grand Prix. So it's something which happens in junior category already, and I can see why people would want it in terms of it sort of mixing up the show a little bit, and like giving them less data and less information, requiring them to maybe think on their feet more. At the same time, give an F1 team and a set of engineers time to think on their feet in any scenario, and they're going to work it out. I don't think that would change a huge amount, if I'm honest with you, in terms of reducing the amount of practice that's available. In terms of what Stefano De Michele has said, I find it very interesting when he talks about it's the because at the end of the day, he is, I think you could argue, he's a politician, and he's got a sort of like the public is his version of the politician's public, and he's got to try and please his public. And he referred regularly in his statements on this matter to, we have to go with what the fans want. What the fans want is the most important. And I agree. I think going with what the fans want is important, because they know what they think, and they sort of are the ones who tune into F1 on a regular basis. But I think that makes it very easy for them to force Stefano De Michele to pick what he wants, because he knows that some of the fans will support what he wants, and he can go, we're pleasing all the fans, look at us, when in reality they are pleasing a section of fans. So I think we have to be very careful when he starts saying comments about sort of please the fans. We have to go with what the fans want. All the fans. I love the fans. Love me, fans, and all that. A cynic might say he used to be a Ferrari team principal, and Ferrari aren't top of the tree right now. That's what I'm saying.
I think that's more a conspiracy theory, but
possibly, yeah.
Yeah, I do think that's very fair, though. It gets to the point now where you're pushing through more racing, more weekends, more Grand Prix, the biggest F1 calendar we've ever seen, going all around the globe because it's what the quote-unquote fans of the people want. I'm not too sure about that, but you've seen some backlash, haven't you, to the idea of more racing and more F1 is good. You have Verstappen, for example, that's saying at one point he may even quit the sport owing to it, saying it's already a very intense calendar, not a fan at all of the new sprint format, and I suppose for him it's balancing that act, isn't it, really, Domenicali that is, between the racers and the fans, because if you go too much in the way of the fans, then the racers and those who actually bring the money in and the spectacle get cheesed off, but then go too much the other way and people don't tune in. So is there perhaps a storm brewing there with the world champion to be?
Wow, you're calling that one early. After race 3, there you go.
I know.
Tom.
Shocking, aren't I?
Oh, wow, you've ruined the rest of the season for us with that.
I don't get all my predictions right, as you know.
No, look, he you know, it was weird because there was that story, and then alongside I saw the fact that in a completely different interview, Max Verstappen said, "I'm going to be in the sport for years and years and years and years because I love driving." So, I hear this as just nonsense. It's just nonsense. That's all it is. He's not going to leave the sport. No driver's going to leave the sport because of sprint races. It's just not going to happen. And if it does, there are so many more drivers waiting in the wings. Do you think Max Verstappen is going to miss out on the chance to try and get his 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or maybe 8th world championship just because someone's going to make the sport's evolving and make him drive, 6 more races a year? Nonsense. It's not going to happen. And I can't see any driver on the grid currently who's worked very hard to get to where they've got, being like, well, too much driving, too much racing, I'm out of here. Take me to NASCAR.
Yeah, I totally do get that. I don't think he's going to be quitting the sport when he has the chance to go and get many more world championships under his belt. But as I've seen, many a great driver or driver who's indeed at the top of the tree at the moment, or team who's doing very, very well, try to go and use their influence to go and, I suppose, steer the sport in a certain direction, a direction of their pleasing. So maybe that's what he's trying to do, and using some of his leverage a bit too overtly, shall we say. But would you agree with that, Angus, before we wrap up?
Ooh, I'll tell you what, it's not a bad point to make, because that is something which I think that it would be silly of him not to do, if you get me, because he is a whether he likes it or not, whether he knows it, he is a stakeholder. He's a major stakeholder in Formula One, with him being its primary character, arguably its best driver, its best competitor. So I think that it could be that. I think that at the same time he's just naturally outspoken. I think he doesn't have much of a filter. I think he's got better over the years, because I think he's just matured, and he's now 25 as opposed to when he was like 18, 19 and mouthing off everyone and everything. But yeah, it could be a combination of him being outspoken, but also a subtle power move by the world champion there.
And it seems that's all we've got time for in terms of episode 8 of F1 in Review 2023. Thank you very much for listening. Be your preferred podcast provider of choice or elsewhere. A reminder, as always, you can follow us on Twitter and TikTok, our handle being F1 in Review, all one word, of course, capital F. We'll be back next week to discuss Ferrari, what's going on at House with Kevin Magnussen, and are Red Bull being penalised enough? Tune in next week to find out more. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.